Not far from Paradise, Nova Scotia, you'll find the Roxbury Road. It's still officially a road, but as you get further up, it becomes pretty difficult for vehicles to pass. So it's become a popular place for mountain bikers and hikers. Now, if you're brave enough to take on this challenge, this road will take you to one of the Maritime's last remaining true ghost towns, Roxbury. And that's where I'm headed today on my walkabout. Roxbury was originally called Durland Settlement because the first English settler was Thomas Durland in the early 1800s. He was an English loyalist, but people lived in what would become Roxbury long before then. I've never been to Roxbury, and I don't know what to expect. I've seen a few photos of fallen down buildings and cemeteries, but I do know that ghost towns are not usually like ghost towns in movies. The buildings are not all standing there, nice and as if they were just abandoned. The Friends of Roxbury, however, have put signage all the way up and down this road to give you an idea of what used to be here. This is where I am right now, and that is where I'm going. Local legend holds that the Mi'kmaq rescued 60 Acadian settlers at the time of the deportation and brought them up here to South Mountain to try and save them. Unfortunately, none of the settlers survived the harsh winter on South Mountain. But in this area, there are a lot of Acadian remnants, and one of them is this rock. It's said that this rock marks the spot of hidden Acadian gold, a little bit like Roxbury's own version of Oak Island. To the left of me along the trail is what remains of an Acadian orchard. There's little left to show for it except some tired apple trees. The original forest species are taking back the land, erasing the reminder of those who once lived here. The random connections to Acadians in this area go beyond mysteries of buried treasure, apple orchards, and fleeing the expulsion. Not far from here, a stagecoach followed the spine of South Mountain from Halifax all the way to Annapolis Royal. Annapolis Royal was the administrative capital of Nova Scotia at the time, and the route allowed the English to move troops out of sight of the Acadians. After the expulsion, the old route was largely abandoned in favor of a route along the valley floor that's very close to today's highway. The Roxbury Road goes up South Mountain. Now, South Mountain is a granite ridge that runs from the Annapolis Basin all the way to Mount Uniacke near Halifax. On the other side of the Annapolis Valley is North Mountain, and thus you have the valley in between. Now, South Mountain isn't like the Rockies. It's much older, it's not quite as high. However, it is high enough that it protects the Annapolis Valley from the harsh weather that comes off the Atlantic Ocean. And that's what helps make the Annapolis Valley such a good place to farm. Many of the communities along the mountains were very poor. They were often small and isolated. Roxbury was no different. It was, by almost any definition, subsistence living. This is the inspiration tree. This tree survived a great fire that swept across South Mountain in the early 1900s. That fire would become really important to the history of Roxbury. I'll talk about that a bit later. But the reason it's called the inspiration tree has nothing to do with why people might settle here. It's not because it was an inspiration to work in this area. No, it's a sign that on your hike, you've come just over 4.5 kilometers, and there's only half a kilometer left to go before you reach the town of Roxbury. It's meant to inspire you to continue. And that's exactly what I'm going to do. Roxbury was never a really big town. There were only 15 families and perhaps 60 people who lived here. But it did have some amenities, like a one-room schoolhouse. And school was a bit different here. It ran from May to November because the children worked in the forestry industry in the winter and on the harvest in the fall. It's parts of the road like this that really make it difficult to pass if you were to try to drive a car up here. And this is actually pretty good. So this is much better for hiking, or even mountain biking would be a lot of fun through here. Believe it or not, Roxbury was actually a pretty busy place. In addition to the school, it also had a post office, a sawmill, a gristmill, and a store. Of course, no one lives in Roxbury these days. The 57 acres that makes up the former town site is now a protected park reserve. There are hunting and fishing camps in the area, and a large lake at the end is used by Nova Scotia Power for generation and by the public for canoeing and fishing. So after about 6 kilometers down the Roxbury Road, I've arrived at the town of Roxbury. After the break, I'm going to explore the town.
Oh, come on, won't you be mine? Feel the sunshine.
I bet it's not every ghost town that has a visitor's mailbox and a guest book. And I'm just not sure whether this is for the ghosts to let them know who is here, or whether it's for the Friends of Roxbury. But for whoever it's for, there you go. Oh, yeah, wow. One of the things you have to be careful of when you walk around an old town site like this is wells. They're all over the place and it's very easy to trip into one. Some of them are very deep. This one, though, looks like it's been largely filled in. But you can see how they would have been hand dug and then lined with stone. This is probably one of the original foundation walls, or more likely a property wall, back from the days when this was a thriving, busy town. So right around here is an old foundation of a home or business that would have been in Roxbury so many years ago. And the well is right about where I'm standing. This giant tree trunk has fallen right into it. It's just a sign of how the wilderness is overtaking this town and reclaiming it as its own. There are believed to be 3 cemeteries in the Roxbury area. Only 2 have been found. This path has been marked by the Friends of Roxbury and leads to the Hines Cemetery. This property would have been the Hines property, and it wouldn't have been all that uncommon for people to have small family plots. Michael Hines 1802 to 1874, and his wife Margaret A., 1808 to 1880. She died at the same age, was born 6 years after him, and died 6 years after. This one you can't read anymore. You can see the remnants of the old town. This is all that's left of Michael Hines' home that he built in the early 1830s. He passed it on to his son Robert, who lived here until sometime around 1910. It passed through the hands of a few families until the last full-time resident anyhow of this home was Andrew Rosengren. After that, it became a bunkhouse for forestry work on the South Mountain and even became a hunting camp by the 1960s. But by that point, the town of Roxbury had long ceased to exist. This is all that's left of the Charles Derlin property. A few stones from the foundation and this very deep well. Yeah, I wouldn't want to fall down there. You might remember the Derlin name. This was originally called Derlin Settlement, after the Derlin family. One of the most interesting things about exploring a place like Roxbury is trying to figure out how these homesteads were laid out. For example, this is a raised area. It may have been the home or part of the home, but as you go down, you can see that it's been dug out and there was a handmade stone foundation. And at the bottom, it's covered in bricks. And this one was charred by the looks of things. So, I mean, this may have been a kitchen or perhaps a forge. They may have had a small blacksmith shop back here. You just never know. And that's one of the interesting things about hiking around a ghost town. This is the mill pond. I'm not quite sure whether it was for the grist mill or the sawmill in this area, but it's a man-made pond. There's a man-made stone wall at the end that holds the water in. It's really low at the moment because this summer was just so dry. "73 years old. That would have been really good. The other one there's 27. The decline of Roxbury began in 1903 when a forest fire ravaged South Mountain, destroying the timber supply for the mill. The end of Roxbury came in 1927. Andrew Rosengren had moved out of the Hines home by then, and the last family to leave was the Thigesons, later that same year. Nova Scotia is full of towns and villages that have been lost to the wilderness. Roxbury is at least still somewhat identifiable. It's hard to imagine that at one time this road, the Roxbury Road, would have been teeming with people eking out a living, children playing, and traffic to the sawmill that would have been just down by the lake. It's getting late here, and so my time on this trail is done for the day. After all, I'm not all that keen on spending the night with ghosts. So after the break, I'm headed for a quick stop in Annapolis Royal and then on to Delaps Cove. After a day spent in Roxbury, it's well worth a visit to Annapolis Royal. This town was the capital of French Acadia and British Nova Scotia for over 150 years. It was originally French, and it took the British 6 tries to make it change hands. This was also the site of 13 battles during the American Revolutionary War, more than anywhere else in North America. These days, it's a great place to stay, to take in the history, and to sample some fine eats, just like those German treats at the German bakery where I'm headed now. With my pretzel in hand and my German baked goods for the road, the sun shining, it's another beautiful day to go explore a trail. 20 minutes from here is the Delaps Cove Wilderness Area, and that's where I'm headed next.
Won't you be mine? Feel the sunshine.
The Delaps Cove Wilderness Trail is really 2 trails, the Bowhawker Trail and Charlie's Trail. Today, I'm headed out on the Bowhawker Trail. The Bowhawker Trail is named after Bowhawker Brook that I'll come upon a little bit later in this hike. That brook is in turn named after one of the early landholders in this area. And they have a guest book. I always love looking at the guest books and seeing where it is that people came from. A lot of them nearby. Wolfville, Halifax, Lower Sackville, Greenwood, Centerville, South Alton, Woods Harbor. This wilderness area encompasses about 130 acres. It was once part of the Bowater Mersey Paper Company holdings, but in the 1980s it was purchased by the County of Annapolis for public use. That actually makes it one of the oldest public use trails in the province. Delaps Cove was once a thriving black community of about 70 families. It was formed when Black Loyalists arrived here from the United States. Black Loyalists were people who sided with the British Crown during the American Revolutionary War. About 3,000 Black Loyalists made their way to Nova Scotia during that time. Coming down the other side of North Mountain, we're arriving at the Bay of Fundy. And in a day like today, it's a dramatic bay indeed. So why Nova Scotia? Well, as the British were looking to leave the American colonies, they needed somewhere to settle white and black loyalists. Nova Scotia was seen as largely unoccupied, despite the fairly significant Mi'kmaq and Acadian presence already here. The settlers were promised fertile, rich land, but for the Black Loyalists arriving at Delaps Cove, it really didn't turn out that way. Not only that, they were in for a harsh winter, living in tents and pit homes. With its basalt rock foundation, Delaps Cove was largely infertile land. Sadly, that was very typical of land given to black settlers. Living on the Bay of Fundy side of North Mountain would have made for some very isolated living. Over time, the black settlers integrated with the Mi'kmaq community here. They would hunt and fish together, participate in ceremonies together. Over time, they even began to live together. This is Bohawker Falls. It towers 43 feet above the floor of the cove below. Now where I'm standing at the moment, well, that would normally be a rush of water crossing over these rocks. But this summer it's a bit dry in Nova Scotia, and like so many waterfalls, it's running a little bit dry. In 2012, some of the land around this trail was donated by the Meyer family. And this point is called Meyer Point. In spring, Nova Scotia's official flower, the Mayflower, can be found along these trails. And back on the shore, dulse, a popular local snack, can be found, as well as cranberries. Rapidly moving streams like this one are a feature of the North Mountain. Now, I know it doesn't look like it's moving very quickly now, but in some parts it is. And you can imagine what this would look like in the spring. It's September now, and of course it hasn't rained very much. But even as we get into October and the hurricanes come moving through, the water levels here will rise. And because of that change in water level, you see the erosion that's carved out the rocks on either side. And there's different kinds of plants that will grow along here. Ones that can survive when the ground is just a little bit damp, but still survive when they're covered in water. Coltsfoot is probably one of the better known ones. Most people would consider it a weed in their garden, but it's very common in the woods of the North Mountain. There are even fish in certain parts of this stream at different times of the year. You could come here 12 months of the year, and this spot would look different every single time. I mentioned that there are two different trails that form the Delaps Cove Wilderness area, the Charlie's Trail and the Bohawker Trail. Today I'm on the Bohawker Trail, but if I wanted to now go off and do the Charlie's Trail, which itself is a beautiful spot, I'd just turn off here. From a ghost town to the shore of the Bay of Fundy, steeped in the history of Annapolis. I've gone from the top of South Mountain to the other side of North Mountain in search of adventure. Wherever your walkabout takes you, I hope you find new adventures around every turn.
Hey, come on, feel the sunshine. Oh, come on, won't you be mine? Hey, come on, feel the sunshine. Oh, come on, won't you be mine? Oh, hey, oh, hey, oh, hey, feel the sunshine. Oh, hey, oh, hey, oh, hey, feel the sunshine.